Good morning and welcome to Trevor Phillips on Sunday. The 21st of June marks the longest day of the year, but as it stands, there's precious little daylight on whether that date will also be the day lockdown finally comes to an end. The Prime Minister says he's going to spend the next week studying the final data before making a decision. Between now and then, he's also got to host a G7 summit, see off possibly the biggest rebellion from his own MPs since the last election, and deal with the fallout from the resignation of his education advisor. It's fair to say the Prime Minister will need every hour of daylight he can get and maybe some good advice, and we'll have lots for him from our guests this morning. On today's show, we'll be discussing all those topics. In just a few moments, we'll be hearing from the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, about that big decision around the 21st of June. After the government advisor on schools catch-up resigned, we'll be talking to the Shadow Education Secretary, Kate Green. One of the Conservatives planning to rebel tomorrow against plans to cut foreign aid, Tom Tugendhat, will also be on the show, as will the WHO's special envoy on COVID-19, Dr David Nabarro. And we'll be discussing the safety of going ahead with the roadmap as planned with the President of the Academy of Medical Sciences, Dame Anne Johnson. But first, we can go to central London, where we're joined by the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock. Good morning, Mr. Hancock. Earlier this week, the Prime Minister told us that we have to proceed cautiously on lifting lockdown. But nonetheless, nothing in the data that he'd seen suggested we need to interfere with the roadmap. Is there anything, Secretary of State, this morning that you know about, that you've seen, that would require delay, pause or modification?
Well, it's too early to make a final decision on that. As you said, the Prime Minister and I and the team will be looking at all of the data over this week. We've said that we'll give people enough time ahead of the 21st of June date, when this is penciled in, the next step to be not before the 21st of June. And the critical thing is to see whether the 4 tests that we set have been met. And that's in terms of the number of cases, and cases are rising slightly. The number of hospitalizations, which are much more flat, and that's because the 3rd test, the rollout of the vaccine, which is going incredibly well. And then, of course, we've got to look at the impact of new variants, and we have seen a very significant impact of a new variant, the so-called Delta variant, over the last month or so.
Yes, in fact, that's the big unknown here, isn't it? What you call the Delta variant, which a lot of people still call the Indian variant, we don't know yet what that's going to do. What's the latest number on that? And do you have any information on transmissibility? We heard this week from SAGE that it could be 40% more transmissible than the previously dominant variant. So what is the Indian variant doing to your calculations?
Well, that figure, around 40% more transmissible, it is indeed, that's the latest advice I have. That means that it is more difficult, obviously, to manage this virus with the new Delta variant. But crucially, after 2 doses of vaccine, we are confident that you get the same protection as you did with the old variant. So the good news is that the vaccine still works just as effectively. Everybody must go and get their 2nd jab, though, because the first isn't quite as effective on its own. You need that 2nd jab. So ultimately, it does make the calculation more difficult for the 21st of June, but it doesn't change our strategy, which is we all need to go and get vaccinated, and that way we will break this link from the number of cases through to the number of hospitalizations.
It sounds like you buy the suggestion made by Chris Hobson, the head of NHS providers, yesterday, that the vaccine has actually broken the link between the virus and serious illness and hospitalizations and death. Are you confident about that now?
Well, I've said that that link is severed but not broken. It isn't completely broken, but we've made a massive, massive difference. The majority of people going into hospital with COVID now are unvaccinated. And that is, obviously that's a challenge for them, but it's good news for all of us because it shows that the vaccine protects you from going into hospital. Now, this week, we'll be opening up vaccines to the under 30s. And so we're getting a step closer to the point when we've been able to offer the vaccine to all adults in this country. And then once we've got everybody having had their second dose, of course, then you'll get this protection that we're seeing at the moment amongst older people. You'll get that protection throughout the whole adult population. And that way, we can get out of this and restore our freedoms. But you know, the timing of exactly when we can take that step is the big question. We are not saying no to the 21st of June at this point. We'll keep watching the data for another week and critically watching that link from the number of cases to the number of people who end up in hospital. And it is absolutely true that the number of people ending up in hospital is broadly flat at the moment, whereas the number of cases is rising, showing that link is not absolute as it once was.
Secretary of State, I want to come to the point you raised about age in a moment, but let's just close off on June the 21st if we can. If the data demands a judgment call, because in the end, it's not the scientists who decide this, it's going to be you and the Prime Minister. Are you prepared for a modification of some kind, not lifting lockdown completely, but lifting most of the restrictions? For example, would you consider lifting lockdown, but asking people to continue to work from home?
Well, we consider all options, and the way that we have set this out is as follows, that there are a series of things at the moment, restrictions on how you can live your life, that we have said will be part of step 4, when we can take step 4, which include, for instance, the rule of 6 and the fact that there's still some businesses that are closed. But then, as well as that, we have 4 reviews into international travel, into certification, and into social distancing, for instance. And we are concluding those reviews and doing that work at the same time. So of course, we're constantly looking.
Any of those things could be varied. Social distancing, for example.
Well, we haven't yet set out the approach to social distancing after step 4, and that is something that we're working on with our scientific advisors. But as you say, guided by the science, but ultimately it'll be ministers who make these decisions.
One of the things that we now know is that, you know, all the oldsters, people like me, we've had our double jabs. Half the population's is fully jabbed now. Does that mean that we're heading now to a situation where you're going to want to jab all children and essentially make sure that before everybody gets back to school in September, all children have been inoculated?
Well, I'm delighted that the regulator, having looked very carefully at the data and with their typical rigour and independence, has come forward and said that the jab is safe and effective for those who are over the age of 12. So we're only talking about children over the age of 12 here. And we're taking advice currently from the Joint Committee on Vaccinations and Immunisations, the experts in this, on the right approach to putting that into practice. Now, of course, for the time being, as of today, we're vaccinating people aged 30 and over. Next week, we'll move to opening up vaccinations to the under 30s who are adults. So we've got a few weeks yet until we come out with a plan for exactly how and if we take this forward. But we know that the vaccine both protects you and helps stop you transmitting. And I want to protect education as much as anybody does. You know, I'm the father of 3 school-aged children. And so making sure that we don't have those whole bubbles having to go home and the isolation, especially as we saw over the autumn, for instance, you know, that has big upsides for education.
Are you detecting anything in the data that would give you cause to be concerned about spread of virus amongst young people and children?
No, and I think that it's very reassuring that the that the regulator has come forward to say that the vaccine is safe. That's in respect to the vaccine and young people. In terms of the impact of the virus on young people, it is very, very rare that young people are affected very negatively. There is some long COVID amongst children, and also crucially, they can pass it on. And that means that they have to isolate if they test positive, and then the whole bubble has to isolate, and you get all that disruption to education that we don't want to see.
So the aim of vaccinating children is essentially to protect older people. You're not worried about children.
So I'm so sorry, I missed that question.
The aim of extending the vaccination down the age range to children is more because you want to protect older people than because you're worried about spread amongst children.
Well, the spread amongst children does have an impact on others, and critically, we know how much it disrupts education as well. And then there is this the problem of long COVID in some children who test positive. So there's plenty of good reasons to do this, but we also will want to be very careful and make sure that we listen to the scientific advice on exactly what approach we take.
Are you listening to Tony Blair this morning? He suggested that we should be able to discriminate in favour of those who are fully vaccinated. Businesses should be able to give extra freedoms to those who can show that they are fully jabbed. Is that part of your plan?
Well, this is what the certification review is looking into, and that will report soon. The good news is we now have the technology available to do this, right? If you download the NHS app right now and you get yourself registered on it, then you will be able to see your vaccine status. You know, if I open my NHS app, it shows and can prove that I've had, in my case, one jab, and which jab and the date that you had it. And so we've got the technology in place. We know this is going to be needed because for international travel, some other countries have said that they're going to require this sort of proof. And so we're putting that in place. But in terms of using this domestically, we haven't gone there yet. We have this certification review, and we'll be publishing the results of that quite soon.
I do like the word "yet" there, Secretary of State. It sounds that you are actually open to the Blair advice.
Well, this debate has been going on for months, and we've been doing the work inside government, and we'll be coming out with our answers to that soon. When I say yet, the thing is that we know that this is going to be needed internationally because some other countries have said that it will, including, for instance, the EU. And so being able, you know, one of my jobs is to make sure you and everybody watching has the ability to prove that you've had the jabs, so that if, say, the EU bring this in, as they've said they will, then you'll be able to travel when it's safe to do so. Not yet, sadly, but when it's safe to do so. So we know that this is going to be needed internationally. On the domestic front, you know, that's a matter for Michael Gove.
OK, Secretary of State, what you've told me is the data, we're not sure, and so on and so forth. One of the reasons that we are uncertain is this Indian variant. And I wonder if you would accept that, frankly, you've only got yourself to blame for this. You put Pakistan on the red list at the beginning of April when the metrics were at a certain point. It then took you a further more than 2 weeks to put India on the red list, even though its metrics were worse than Pakistan. This is your fault, isn't it?
Well, the facts in your question were wrong. I've been through this many times, including on this programme with a couple of weeks ago. So the positivity of those coming in from India was a third what it was those coming from Pakistan. And at the dates that you mentioned, we didn't even know about the B1617.2 variant. And so you have to make these decisions on the data that you've got. You can't make decisions on the basis of data that you only find out afterwards because it obviously isn't available. So I'm afraid There are some people who were putting it about that India was in a... There are some people who were putting it about that India was in a worse state than Pakistan at that moment when we took that decision, but unfortunately it isn't true.
That is not the question I asked. I'm reading your data here. Within days of Pakistan reaching 4.6% of positivity, you had Pakistan on the red list. It took you 2 weeks from knowing that India had a positivity rate of 5.1% to put India on the red list. Why?
No, I don't recognise those figures.
They're your numbers.
What I can tell you...
They're your numbers.
Well, what I can tell you is that as we saw the case rates rise in India, and as we saw the this new variant, the now Delta variant, arriving, then we took the action to put India on the red list. And it's tough action, but I'm very glad that we took it. In the same way that this last week we saw this potentially dangerous new variant in Portugal.
Nobody's going to contest that you made the right call, tough action, all the rest of it. It's just that it took you a long time, and longer than it could have done. And nobody's going to complain now, but I'm just saying, looking back now, would you accept that you could have done this days before the time when you did? And remember, during that period, it's estimated that something like 20,000 people arrived from India, when actually we could have had them on the red list.
Well, I'm grinning, Trevor, because I absolutely think hindsight is very helpful, and of course, during a pandemic, you get more information. But you have to take decisions with the information that you have at the time, and you can't ask anybody to take decisions with information that isn't yet in your hands, even if you'd like to be able to predict the future.
I'm just reading the information you had at the time, but let's just deal with something that's happening this week. You want to support the developing world, and you want to use their stocks to vaccinate British children. Are you worried that we're going to, in a way, look like we don't care about the rest of the world because we're going to extend vaccination programme down the age range when actually, for example, in Africa, only 2.5% have been vaccinated? And we could be giving more stocks to African countries now.
I am going to answer this question, but first I'm afraid you can't get away with making a comment on my previous answer and then just moving on when the comment was wrong. You have to take information with the decisions with the information you have at the time, and the information that you've been talking about was not available to ministers at that time. So, that's why we took those decisions. We took the right decisions based on the information that we had, and of course, information came forward subsequently. Now, moving on to the other question, which is also very important. My first duty is to protect the UK population, and that does include trying to minimise transmission. And the way that we're helping the rest of the world is primarily with giving away at no cost the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. This was an agreement we came to over a year ago, and it means that of the 2 billion doses delivered around the world, 500 million of them are the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. 70% of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine doses are in low and middle income countries. I'm incredibly proud of this, and the reason that we've been able to do that is because we've made it available at cost, no charge for the intellectual property from the start. So I'm delighted now there is a global debate, including around the G7 table, about how we can do more to vaccinate the world. But this country has done more than any other by making sure that from the start that Oxford vaccine has been available at cost. And that's why within the COVAX programme, which is the programme that is designed to get vaccines to countries that can't afford them themselves, 96% of the doses are our Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine delivered at cost. So, absolutely, let's get this done. But we've been on this for over a year.
Yeah. Is this going to be associated with your big challenge this week, which is over the foreign aid budget? Are you going to count the value of those doses that you send to Africa as part of the foreign aid budget in order to drive up the percentage?
No. So the doses that are being made around the world, 20 different factories around the world, at no cost, that doesn't count as aid. You know, it doesn't take aid to help the world. What we've done is we've invented a vaccine that's easy to transport, easy to administer, and we made an agreement with Oxford University and AstraZeneca over a year ago to deliver it at cost. So obviously the money we also put into COVAX counts as aid, but the really big contribution is getting this vaccine out to everyone as cheaply as we possibly can.
Yeah.
So it shows that you can help the world with far more things than just overseas development aid, and this is probably the biggest gift this country could give to the rest of the world, is to make a vaccine, to put in the money into the science, and then to make it available at cost.
I'm going to talk to Tom Tugendhat in a few minutes, Secretary of State. He is one of, it is estimated, 30 or 40 rebels on this foreign aid legislation. What can you offer him to persuade him to fall in line?
Well, I think that the decisions that the government's taken around this are entirely reasonable. We face a once-in-300-year economic interruption. The cost of that to the Exchequer has been hundreds of billions of pounds. So it is reasonable, absolutely reasonable in the circumstances, when we're delivering over £10 billion of aid as a country, and we're making available this vaccine at cost, and we have such a strong history in this area. It is absolutely reasonable to take the decision that the government has.
Secretary of State, I can't let you go without giving you the opportunity to reply to what has been said about you by a former senior advisor at Number 10. Dominic Tummings told MPs last week that you should have been fired at least 15 times for lying. You have said since then that you've always told the truth. There's no middle way here, no room for misunderstanding. Which one of you is lying?
Well, I told the House of Commons this. I responded in the House of Commons the week before last about these comments, and I was absolutely categorical about it. Obviously, I work incredibly closely with the Prime Minister, and I talk to him about all things to do with health, and in particularly COVID, all the time. I'm completely straight about what we know, what we don't know, the challenges we've got, and what we're trying to achieve. That's what I said to the House of Commons, and frankly, I think we should leave it there.
Cummings made it up, to be clear.
Well, all I can, I can't give you an insight into that. All I can tell you is what I know to be true, and that is that I've worked, every waking hour on this over the past year and a half, and I've been absolutely straightforward in answering questions, including where we don't know things, as we've in our discussion today. And whether in public or private, one of the challenges of a pandemic is you have to make decisions based on uncertainty. You have to be able to communicate that.
Understood. Thank you very much for your time this morning, Secretary of State.
Thanks for having me on.
This week, the man asked by Boris Johnson to drive the government's education recovery plan resigned after plans were unveiled to spend just £1.5 billion on the programme. Sir Kevin Collins accused the government of a half-hearted approach which risks failing hundreds of thousands of pupils. Now Labour is planning to force a vote in Parliament over the issue. We're joined by the Shadow Education Secretary, Kate Green. Kate Green, if I can just ask you on COVID, what do you make of what Matt Hancock has just been saying? Do you think we're heading towards ending lockdown on June 21st, and are you happy about that?
Well, it's a very difficult, a very finely balanced decision for the government, and it's absolutely right that it's taken on the basis of all the available data, and that it's transparently taken, and that it's robust. Obviously, we're all keen to see things get as near to normal as possible, as quickly as possible, but that must be done with public health in mind. And so I would say if we have to maintain some protective measures beyond the 21st of June, that is what the government should do. But I think it is really important that it's a decision taken on the basis of the data.
But knowing what you do now, what you know now, would you basically go along with the noise that's coming from government at the moment, which is there is no reason yet to deviate from the roadmap, which essentially heads to lifting all the restrictions on June the 21st?
What I'm hearing different experts say is that it's very finely balanced, that it's not a clear-cut decision at this stage. So I don't think I'm in a position to say today, and I don't think the government should be in a position to say today, what will be the answer on June the 21st. I think it's a very finely balanced decision. It's one that's got to be taken with the benefit of all the data, and one that the government has to be absolutely open and transparent about and accountable for.
Are you going to welcome the Prime Minister's call to jab the world by the end of next year?
I'm afraid I didn't hear that, Trevor, sorry.
I asked you if Labour is going to welcome the Prime Minister's call to the G7 to have the whole world jabbed by the end of next year, 2022.
Yes, I think that's a really good call, because we've all known that unless everybody in the world is safe, nobody is fully safe. And of course, while I really welcome the progress that we've made in this country with rolling out the vaccination programme, the NHS, our scientists have done a wonderful job. We obviously still have people who need to receive the vaccine here, and it's very important that, for example, in the areas where we're seeing a rise in the Delta infection, that we have surge vaccination programmes put in place and effective. But I do think that it is absolutely our obligation as members of the global community to make sure that we are getting vaccines to people in the countries that desperately need them, and making sure that those people are safe, because that's the right thing to do morally, and it's in the interests of everybody in the world, and including in this country.
On education, you've criticised the government over its plans for a catch-up programme, and Sir Kevin Collins, who you've supported this week, said that the government would need to spend something like £15 billion. Would you support Kevin Collins's programme for an extended school day, which is what most of the money would have been spent on?
Well, we've put forward our own proposals, which also include activities after the end of the formal school day and breakfast clubs before the start of the formal school day. And I very much welcome the suggestions that Kevin Collins is making. Many of them are very similar to the proposals that we are putting forward. We know that activities, art, sport, drama and so on, schools have wonderful facilities to offer. It's a shame for those facilities to shut up shop at 3:30 when children could continue to benefit from them. We know that children's emotional and social well-being is as important to parents and teachers right now as making up lost learning. So those activities will give them a real chance to enjoy their childhoods, to rebuild that social well-being. But also, of course, it will benefit children and young people's learning. And so, yes, I think Kevin Collins' proposals are very good, and I do very much welcome the proposal to use extra time at the beginning of the end of the school day to offer those additional activities.
Your proposals are priced at about £14.7 billion from the document you've issued. Collins says £15 billion over the next 3 years. OK, they overlap. But is the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, OK with you wanting to spend something north of £20 billion of public money over the next 3 years? Is that Labour policy?
So these proposals signed off by Rachel and the Shadow Treasury team with the support of the entire Shadow Cabinet, because we are entirely committed to giving priority to children and young people's education. You may have heard Keir Starmer saying it was his #1 priority in his interview with Piers Morgan earlier this week. We've costed these proposals very carefully. If people want to look at our Children's Recovery Plan, they can see the detail of every element of that plan and how we've costed it. We also also know that the government itself, and quite rightly, has set aside a COVID reserve to get the country back on its feet after the pandemic. What we're talking about is how do we spend money that the government knows it will have to spend? We're talking about priorities here. So I would say that it's absolutely right that we should give top priority to children and young people. That's our responsibility to them as adults. But it's also in our interest as a country, because the cost of not spending £14.5 billion now in terms of lost earnings, lost productivity in the future will run into hundreds of billions of pounds. And I'm delighted and very grateful to Rachel and my Shadow Treasury colleagues for their very constructive support and help in putting this package together.
Just to be absolutely clear, this does include an extended school day. And by the way, are the teaching unions OK with that? More hours for teachers?
Yes, so what we're talking about is a range of activities at the end of the school day, some including sport, art, drama, culture, so on. There could be also the opportunity for some formal teaching and learning. We're not saying that any teacher would have to do that, and indeed a lot of the sports and music and so on might be done by youth and community groups, although teachers who want to would be able to and would be paid to do so. We have been in very close discussions with the teaching unions, and they understand that position. We've agreed that we will make sure with them that we're tracking exactly how any extension of activities after the school day impacts on workload, so that there can be very quick measures taken if it creates unacceptable burdens on teachers. But, you know, teachers and the teaching unions are as committed as anyone to children and young people's futures, more so. It's their day job, it's what they care about. And when I hear the government rubbishing teachers, rubbishing the teaching unions, rubbishing the professionals who've worked so hard over the last year to support our children and young people, when I know that we have had the most constructive and helpful discussions with them, frankly, I think it's disgraceful.
All right, I think let's just keep talking about the money for the moment. I see this morning that Labour is saying that the tax deal navigated by Rishi Sunak should provide dividends for health and education. Now, you've already given Boris Johnson a pretty big tick on his jabbing the world proposition. Are you going to congratulate Rishi Sunak this morning on his triumph? Because usually it's Labour who's calling for crackdown on tech multinationals and transnationals and the richest in the world, and he seems to have done it.
Labour very much supported Joe Biden's call for a global tax floor of 21%. So it's a first step, but I must say it's disappointing that we have achieved only 15% coming out of the G7 this weekend. And I know that is because Rishi Sunak and the Conservative government in this country were not enthusiastic, were not prepared to back Joe Biden's call for a rate of 21%.
But they did it.
So I think it's good. I think it's good that the G7 collectively have agreed to 15%. I think it's a start. I think it's disappointing that we didn't have a more ambitious 21% agreed that many of the G7 countries, but sadly not Rishi Sunak, wanted to. But at least we've made a start, and that will bring hundreds of billions of pounds into our exchequer.
Kate Green, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for talking to me.
Tomorrow, Boris Johnson could suffer his first parliamentary defeat since winning that big majority in the 2019 election. A number of Conservative MPs, including the Prime Minister's predecessor, Theresa May, are planning to rebel over plans to cut the foreign aid budget. This all comes just days before Boris Johnson hosts world leaders at the G7 summit in Cornwall. One of the rebels is Tom Tugendhat, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and he joins us now. Tom Tugendhat, you want to force the government to keep the figure for foreign aid spending at 0.7% of gross domestic product, around about £14.5 billion last year. And now you need at least 40 Tories to join you. As Lyndon Johnson once said, first rule of politics, learn to count. Have you got the numbers?
Well, we're cautiously optimistic, but the reality is that what we're trying to do here is we're trying to make sure that Britain's foreign footprint, that global Britain, really means something. And I think that's absolutely vital to making sure we achieve our ambitions and our potential. The reality is Britain has a huge opportunity to shape the world at a moment of extraordinary flux. And this, along with our defence and diplomatic and trade capabilities, is part of that. So I'm absolutely committed to making sure Britain really is great on the international stage. And the Prime Minister has been as clear as you can possibly be about global Britain being an ambition for all of us. So I'm delighted that he has expressed support, and I hope very much that he'll see that this is an opportunity to demonstrate it.
But his words don't seem to match the spending as far as you're concerned. One wheeze which appears to be doing the rounds is the idea that the doses that Britain might send to Africa and other developing countries in other regions could be counted against the 0.7% target, and that actually you could make up the gap that way. Now, Matt Hancock was a bit not too positive about that, but would that be something that you could accept?
Well, I certainly think that foreign aid comes in many forms, and as Matt correctly pointed out, the extraordinary generosity of the British people in giving the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccines IP for free to the world has been an extraordinary gift, and one that we should celebrate. So I certainly think the government has done many things for which it should be congratulated, and that's one. But I also think we need to look at the way that some of the aid is being cut in places like Syria, where we know that the war has cost thousands of lives and left millions displaced, or in Lebanon, where they are hosting a displaced population of possibly as much as a quarter or even a third of their own population are internal refugees or refugees from Syria. We know that British aid has done a huge amount, not just for them, but actually for us. We all remember the population movements of 2015 that destabilized parts of Eastern Europe. That's what British aid is helping to prevent, and we should be very proud of it.
But I'm hearing that there might be the beginnings of a deal here if we could wrap the relevant bits into the counting of the money. You're open, you're open to further discussion.
I'm sorry, I missed you there, Trevor.
You're open to further discussion.
I'm absolutely open to further discussion. I think this is a sensible negotiation to have with partners in government who have made some very difficult decisions in recent years. And I think that the government has demonstrated that it's listening. I think one of the things that the government has done well in the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office under Dominic Raab is brought together various elements of aid and diplomatic influence to make sure we get a better delivery on Britain's terms. And I think that's an extremely important action. But what we don't want to do is to achieve a better delivery under some extremely impressive civil servants and individuals who've been working formerly for the DFID office and now for the Foreign Office, and then see their budgets cut.
Let me put to you some of the questions that might be asked about your campaign, Tom Tugendhat. The government's telling us this morning that it cannot afford the £5 billion a year that Kevin Collins wanted for catch-up in education. Funnily enough, the extra 0.2% that you want enshrined in law comes to pretty much the same amount. So some of your red wall voters might be saying, here we go, that's what Tories do. They want to spend all that money on other people's children a long way away, but they can't afford to find the money for our children.
Sorry, Trevor, that's not quite accurate. The reality is that the government has simply asked for greater evidence that the money requested will address the question in the education field that is so required. Nobody's saying that the money isn't there, and nobody is saying that children in our communities won't have the support that they need. And quite the contrary, the government has been very clear that they will get the support that they need. And the only thing that we're discussing with the education question is whether or not the solutions designed meet the aim. Now, whether we hope very much that as soon as they've proven their need, then come the spending review in the autumn, then we'll see the money come forward according to what is necessary, not just simply a blank cheque. And the same is true, by the way, for aid. What Britain has done brilliantly over the last 10 years is under various Conservative governments, it has made sure that aid is very accurately and very directly spent, delivering for everybody and multiplying our need. Because what we've done is we've demonstrated that British aid is always well spent, forgive me. So what happens is we draw other aid with us because, it's, as it were, other countries see that we've done the due diligence.
I don't want to leave the education question just on the numbers, because there is also a question about speed and timeliness, isn't there? If it takes the government another 6 months to decide how much it wants to put into a catch-up programme, and then there's another 6 months where it's implemented, that's an entire year's cohort of children who will have left school without having the advantage of any of those programmes. Shouldn't a decision be made now?
You're asking for speed, and I agree with you. And I think that this is one of those areas where the Education Department needs to present the evidence as fast as possible so that the Treasury can evaluate it. But it's quite right that the Treasury shouldn't be pushing money out of the door unless it's absolutely certain that the programmes work. So I respect the Chancellor's view that you've got to check that the money is going to be delivering exactly what you need. But I also respect the Education Department's demand that we need to have increased spending. And the Prime Minister couldn't have been clearer on this. He has said that the money will be available. There's nobody debating whether or not it should be. The only debate is whether or not it's well spent. Forgive
me, but you, in summary, you would like to see more money and you'd like to see it get there faster.
I would like to see the right amount of money. It's very difficult for me to say more money because until I know exactly how much money is going to be spent, until I know exactly where it's going to be targeted, it's very difficult to know where it should be spent.
OK, I see that you've got an education expert who's clearly going to make a contribution to this discussion. Frankly, I suspect she wants some of that. Anyway, never mind. Tom, let's move on to the issue of how we never go through this again. Part of that is going to be getting a clear understanding of where this virus came from. Do you set any store by the suggestion from UK and United States intelligence sources that it was, in fact, a leak in China, from a laboratory in China?
There is certainly strong suggestions of that, and there is a strong possibility, and it's at least an inquiry or a route of inquiry that needs to be investigated. If you read the 2012 papers that list various forms of research that were being done in the Wuhan laboratory, then you can see that certainly the gain of function areas that they were looking at raise the possibility that this is something that we were looking, that may have happened. Now, I don't know whether it leaked from the Wuhan laboratories, and my guess is the Chinese authorities don't know if it leaked from the Wuhan laboratories because their culture of fear and silence is one that has left them blind, let alone us blind to the causes.
Do you think that, I know that you've got other pressing engagements there, but just let me ask you one last question. Do you think there's any chance that we will ever know the truth about China? You've studied this, you've been in many countries, particularly authoritarian countries. Do you think that there's any chance we'll actually ever find out what the truth is?
Well, I hope we do, and this is exactly what the World Health Organization should be pushing for and looking at, because it's absolutely essential that we do find out the truth. Look, we all run laboratories around the world that research different forms of viruses in order to find vaccines, in order to find cures. And if there has been a leak, we need to know why that was. Is it something that could have happened anywhere? Is it something specific to this laboratory? We don't know. But as I say, the real problem here is that the Chinese Communist Party has developed such a culture of fear amongst its own people that people are afraid of telling the truth. And there's a very strong possibility that we don't find out the truth because the Chinese government itself doesn't know the truth and will never find it out because they have so terrified their own scientists and researchers that they won't be able to tell them.
Tom Tugendhat, thank you very much for squeezing us in against the claims of, frankly, rather more important people than anybody on this show.
My apologies. Thank you.
OK, this week, world leaders will gather for the G7 summit in Cornwall, and ahead of that meeting, the Prime Minister's called on the world's richest nations to ensure that everybody in the world is vaccinated by the end of 2022. Sharing vaccines with developing countries is something that the World Health Organization has been calling for some time. We're joined now by the organisation's special envoy on COVID-19, Dr David Nabarro. Dr Nabarro, I want to come to the point that Tom Tugendhat raised about China in a moment. But can we just start with the Delta variant?
Yes.
And what we call the Indian variant. How worried are you?
Well, of course. By the way, hello, Trevor, and thank you for the opportunity to hear the interview just now. I know what you're going to ask me in a second. I just wanted to say, yes, all variants that are being looked at right now that are identified as variants of concern are just that. They're variants that collectively we are concerned about, and they are the variants that have either greater transmission capacity or the ability to cause worse disease, and all of them are ones that everybody needs to focus on. But there will continue to be variants emerging with this virus at intervals in the foreseeable future. So we shouldn't be surprised by variants. They are to be expected. That's par for the course.
So is it the WHO's view, really, that we are into a world in which suppression of infection to zero is impossible and a pointless aim, and that what we really need to do is to learn how to live with this thing?
Well, you said it, and I would like to stress to you that humanity is going to have to learn how to coexist with this virus, preventing it from spiking and then surging and causing hotspots of disease. And we're going to have to be able to do this for the foreseeable future. Eradication is not currently a reasonable target for the world.
One signal of that choice would be an approach to international travel. From what you've said, it sounds like you think, actually, we should return to international travel with fewer limitations sooner rather than later.
Well, like everybody, I want life to start working properly, as they say. I want particularly poorer people to be able to get their incomes back. And I want countries to be able to redevelop their economies, and so does the whole of the World Health Organization. So our approach when working with governments is to encourage them to find ways quickly to work together on things like international travel, as well as on things like the sharing of vaccines, with a global plan. We do think that countries working separately when trying to deal with a worldwide threat is not the most efficient way in which to be doing things right now.
Understood. I've asked you about the Indian variant.
Yes.
Of course, this week we've seen something new, Nepal. And we don't have a lot of information about that yet, but it's thought, I think, to be potentially even more transmissible, possibly more lethal than anything we've seen so far. Any signs from the WHO's data that could tell us more?
It always takes a number of weeks after there is a sudden surge and thoughts perhaps that a new variant has appeared to confirm whether or not this is in fact a variant of concern. There's a group that meets and reviews the data, as you would expect. And so they've looked at the Delta variant, the one that was first reported from India. But as you say, there are reports of an additional variant coming from Nepal, and those will be examined in the coming days and weeks, and then we'll know. But each time there is a sudden surge, it does stimulate in one's mind the thought that there might be a new variant appearing. That wouldn't be surprising. And as I said just now, that's the pattern for the future, Trevor. This virus isn't going away anytime soon. There will be variants emerging. Sometimes we're worried that they're going to be able to break past the defense from the vaccines that have been so brilliantly administered. But we're going to have to work together on it. I describe it as being COVID ready, being ready for whatever this virus might bring.
Are you welcoming the Prime Minister's ambition to vaccinate the whole world by the end of 2022? And more importantly, do you think it's realistic?
Well, I was absolutely delighted to read that. You see, we've always said it's going to take some time for the world to be vaccinated, but for the leader of the UK and also the chair of the G77 to put a date on it is wonderful, because this now means that there's a real prospect that when G7 leaders meet next weekend, they will actually think of a plan for getting towards everybody being vaccinated by the end of 2022. And that would change things, because we'll start saying to each other, how do we use this wonderful gift of the vaccines that are available as well as possible to help the world get ahead of this pandemic, rather than focusing on the interests of individual nations?
One of the prerequisites for all of that to happen is trust between nations and between leaders.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about China. Last February, the WHO more or less absolved China, said it was unlikely that the virus had come out of a Chinese laboratory or indeed out of Wuhan. Does WHO owe the world an apology on that?
Oh, gosh. I mean, I think all of us who work in the issue of this pandemic need to be constantly apologising, because the fact that this pandemic is causing so much suffering is something that is a great distress, and the damage being caused to the world is huge. And people like myself who've worked on pandemic preparedness for something like 2 or 3 decades really have a huge responsibility. Why couldn't we get the world to be better prepared? Now, when it comes to working with nations on dealing with the pandemic, as you probably know, and I'd just like to stress it for everybody else, the World Health Organization isn't some kind of independent superpower that can just choose to do what it likes, where it likes. It has to work within the rules set by the governments that own it. We are owned by all the nations of the world.
But it has to work with science, though, doesn't it?
Of course. So we are, on the one hand, trying to do everything possible to be as straight and science-based as we can. But at the same time, we have to decide where we work and how we work, always trying to make sure that the countries that we work with approve of what we're doing. We don't have carte blanche, Trevor, and I want to stress that. We do what we're able to do.
Isn't that the outcome of that, though, Dr. Nabarro? And
Yes.
This is not a personal point at all.
Of course.
Isn't the outcome of that the nations that are ready to put pressure on the WHO, political pressure, and China is first and foremost amongst them, get their way, and also they get an easy ride when it comes to investigation, for example?
Well, I hope not. I mean, I don't actually think that anybody is saying that any one nation gets let off when it comes to trying to understand what's happening about this pandemic. For example, when we're dealing with pandemics, it's a joint effort between national governments and the WHO. We are mutually dependent on each other, and no nation is let off the hook. And Trevor, inside the WHO, you've got scientists who just want to do the best science in the world, and all they do all the time is to push at countries when countries are somewhat pushing back at us. Okay. And we just say, give us what we need. And we're not going to stop that, Trevor, not going to stop.
I appreciate your time and your directness, Dr. Nabarro. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for having me, and best wishes to everybody. Thank you.
Now, we've spoken a lot today about the Indian variant and what that will mean for the planned easing of restrictions on the 21st of June. The government said that it is looking at the science about the variant to determine its impact. So what do we know so far? Let's ask our next guest. She's the president of the Academy of Medical Sciences, Dame Anne Johnson. Dame Anne, Matt Hancock told us this morning that he didn't quite know where we were, didn't quite know about the impact of the India variant. What are you making of it?
Well, I agree with him that we need more data, and this next week's going to be absolutely critical in obtaining that data. One of the things that we always have is after the opening up of a lockdown, there's always a delay between lifting restrictions and then the emergence of, as we might expect, more infection as people mix together more, and then whether or not that feeds through to severe disease and deaths. Now, what we have in addition to that mix is, of course, the arrival of this Delta variant, which we do understand is more transmissible. And we have seen in the last week or two a significant uptick in the number of cases from what was a very low base. And what we need to understand is what the risks are of that setting off another wave of infection, and also how well we can do in controlling it. So the data that come through in the next week are very important. And just to remind you that with the roadmap, one of the key ideas that we should always have a significant period of 5 weeks between each of the stages was to do exactly that, because of this difficult issue of the delay between opening up and then understanding the impact on transmission. But clearly, this new, more transmissible variant does create new challenges for us.
We have got some data, and we know that there is an uptick in infections, but we also know that hospitalizations are pretty much flat. Should we be more worried about the rise in infections, or more reassured by the lack of an increase in hospitalizations?
Well, I think what is reassuring about the cases that we're seeing, if you look at the age distribution of them overall, we're seeing a much lower proportion in the highly vaccinated population, that is the over 70s. But we're seeing more infection in the younger population, particularly in young people, but also in those who are not vaccinated. Now, I've just said that it takes some time to feed through from infections into hospitalizations and deaths. Now, it is reassuring that we haven't seen yet an uptick in the number of admissions and deaths, but we are sort of 3 weeks now from the last opening up. And when you think about it, it takes a week for virus transmission to increase because the incubation period, and then it's often another week or two before people come into hospital after the infection. So we need to watch very carefully what the outcomes are. But we do know, of course, that the highest levels of protection are now, the 50% of people who now have had both doses are going to be in the more vulnerable group. So hopefully we'll see a continued unlinking. But we do need to think about the 50% who aren't fully vaccinated.
Damon, but is there a risk that the government could find itself in a hole here where it appears to have moved the goalposts? 6 months or a year ago, we were all worried about hospitalizations and deaths. It feels now as though the conversation is much more about but about infections. Is there a danger that what people will feel is we sacrificed, we stayed at home, we complied because we didn't want to overwhelm the NHS? We now know that's not going to happen, but now you've given us a new target, which is don't get infected, and we have to comply and stay at home for that. Is there a concern here that we might appear to be moving the goalposts?
I totally understand your concern. You know, in the end, we're going to have to, if you heard earlier from David Nabarro, live with this virus and try and minimise the amount of severe disease that it causes. But we've still got, I think, quite a lot more to gain from this virus, from the vaccination programme. There's, you know, we've still got quite a significant number of many more people, millions more people who can fully benefit from this vaccine. And I think that is the very difficult decision. We certainly don't want to go on delaying forever. It's going to be a very finely judged decision when we see these results. So one of the issues, of course, as you know, we are getting millions, probably about 3 million people getting their second dose each week, and another 3 million or so getting second dose or a first dose each week. But as we know, there's a delay between getting the dose and being fully protected. So I think that's a very fine balance. The modelers in May showed you could set off, quite a third wave, and that is very dependent both on how transmissible the variant is and the fraction of people who are fully vaccinated. So a third about all those things.
Sorry, so a third wave in your mind is still plausible?
Well, I think the size of, depends how you define a wave, you know. And I think the model, this is, again, we have a lot of uncertainties, but the modelers looked at this back in May and there were concerns about this. I haven't seen the latest modelling because now we've got much more data about the vaccine uptake and the effectiveness and so on. So I think you have to consider that the vaccine does two things. It reduces the risk of disease and it reduces the risk of transmission. So you want to make sure that you're getting, using it as much as you can, and I think we've got a lot more benefit still to get from it as we continue to roll it out. And the big question really is the extent to which we see the extent of transmission with this new variant, and also whether it does translate into further admissions. Now, I think we're going to have to look at that very carefully in the coming week because of exactly the delays I've talked about and looked at the data, including the modelling, the newer modelling.
Dame, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And that is it for today's main show. We've covered a lot of topics, from variants and vaccines to education and aid. After this short break, we'll be going through everything we've learned from our guests in Trevor Phillips' The Take. Sky's deputy political editor, Tam Coates, is back on the beat, and he'll be joining me for that. So don't go anywhere. We'll be back.